The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt, causing it to melt and emit waves of heat. Shelton Noyce stood leaning against the wall of his car wash, shine and clean, proudly watching his team work together seamlessly. 3 years ago, it was just a single location with 2 washers, but now it was a chain of 3 car washes in different parts of Lisbon, Mississippi. For a man who started from scratch with no higher education, it was an undeniable success. "Mr. Noyce," Jamal, the shift supervisor, called out to him, "the customer with the Cadillac wants you to check the results yourself." Shelton nodded and headed for the freshly washed car, which was glistening in the sunlight. He knew that this customer was a local judge, and such attention to detail was part of his strategy for winning influential customers. That was the essence of his business model: personalized service, attention to detail, and working with the city's influential people. "Impeccable as always, Shelton." Judge Carter extended his hand for a handshake. "You're the only one I trust with my car." "We try our best for you, Judge." Shelton shook his client's hand firmly. "How's your wife?" 5 minutes of small talk, and the judge was already leaving, promising to recommend the car wash to his colleagues. Shelton smiled with satisfaction. Step by step, handshake by handshake, he was building his little empire. He knew that some considered him an upstart, but he didn't care. The results spoke for themselves. The phone in his pocket vibrated. Yvonne. Again. "Yes, dear," he replied, trying not to sound too annoyed. "Shelton, do you remember we're having dinner with the Nowells tonight?" His wife's voice sounded tense, as if she already knew the answer. "Damn, it completely slipped my mind. I have a meeting with suppliers at 6. "Shelton, we agreed on this 2 weeks ago." Yvonne's voice was disappointed. "I've already prepared everything, and Aya and Marcus will be here at 7. Shelton clenched his teeth. He hated these dinners with couples from Yvonne's circle. Her medical colleagues and their spouses always made him feel uncomfortable. Their conversations about politics, art, and medicine only highlighted the difference in education between him and his wife. "Okay, I'll try to get out early," he finally said, "but I can't promise anything." Hanging up the phone, Shelton felt a familiar irritation. When they met 12 years ago, Ivana was just a nurse, and he was an ambitious young man with plans to start his own business. They were equals. Now she was the head of the nursing department, a respected professional, and he was still the guy from the car wash, despite all his success. At 6:30, Shelton finally parked his black SUV near their 2-story house in a decent but not upscale neighborhood of Lisbon. They had bought the house 3 years ago, after the business began to generate a steady income. For Shelton, this house was a symbol of success, but also a constant reminder of how much more he still had to achieve. As he entered the house, he was immediately greeted by the aroma of Creole cuisine. Even was cooking her signature jambalaya, a dish that always impressed their guests. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing his wife on the cheek. "The meeting ran late." Ivana just nodded, not taking her eyes off the stove. Her dark hair was pulled back into an elegant bun, and she was wearing a simple but elegant dress that accentuated her slender figure. "You have 15 minutes to take a shower and get changed," she said without looking at him. Shelton went upstairs, feeling increasingly irritated. Ivana used to ask him about his work and take an interest in his meetings. Now it was as if a wall of unspoken words and disappointments had grown between them. An hour later, Shelton sat at a table with Ivana, Aja, and Marcus Nowell, trying to keep the conversation going about the latest city news. Aja, who worked as an administrator at the same hospital as Ivana, talked about new equipment that was going to be installed in their department. "It will completely change the diagnostic process," she said enthusiastically. "Evan, your team will be the first to receive training." "Yes, I've already signed up 6 nurses for the courses." Evan nodded. "This is a big step forward for our hospital." Shelton watched his wife, noticing how her eyes lit up when she talked about her work. When was the last time she had spoken like that about their relationship? "How's your business, Shelton?" asked Marcus, a professor at the local college, clearly trying to engage the host in conversation. "Expanding," Shelton replied briefly. "Thinking about opening a fourth location in the Northern District." "That's great," Marcus nodded. "Small businesses are the backbone of the economy." Shelton struggled not to grimace. Small businesses. He hated that term. To him, his business was the beginning of an empire, not just a small business. "Shelton has a real talent for entrepreneurship," Yvonne interjected, sensing his irritation. "He started with one location, and now he has 3 times more customers than his competitors." Shelton glanced gratefully at his wife. Moments like these reminded him why he had fallen in love with her. She knew how to support him, even when they weren't on the best of terms. After dinner, when the guests had left, they cleared the table in silence. The silence was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. "You could participate more in the conversation," Yvonne finally said as she loaded the dishwasher. "I have nothing to talk about with your friends," Shelton shrugged. "You all discuss work, politics, books I haven't read." Ivana straightened up and looked him in the eye. "We could discuss your interests if you would share them with me sometimes," she said wearily. "Shelton, when was the last time we really talked? Not about trivial things, but about what's important to us." Shelton was silent. He knew she was right, but he didn't want to admit it. Deep down, he understood that their marriage was falling apart, but he preferred to ignore the problem by immersing himself in his work. "Maybe we should see a professional?" Ivana suggested unexpectedly. "A family psychologist or therapist, just to help us communicate better." Shelton's first impulse was to refuse. He had always considered psychologists to be charlatans who sucked money out of gullible people. But something in Yvonne's eyes, a mixture of hope and despair, made him think twice. "I'll think about it," he replied reluctantly. Over the next week, Shelton did indeed think about his wife's suggestion. He watched her in the mornings as she got ready for work, always composed, professional, with that special gleam in her eyes that only appeared when she was talking about her calling. He noticed how she was becoming more distant, how she talked less and less about her day, her patients, her colleagues. Their conversations were reduced to a minimum: what to buy, what to fix, who to invite to dinner. On Friday evening, when he came home earlier than usual, he found Ivana in the living room with a book in her hands. "I agree," he said without preamble. "Let's try this psychologist of yours." Ivana looked up from her book, and Shelton saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time: genuine joy. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've already done some research. There's a good specialist, Nathaniel Gentry. He has excellent reviews." Shelton frowned. "You've already been looking for a therapist? Before I agreed?" "I was hoping you would agree," Ivana replied quietly. "Shelton, I want to save our marriage. Don't you want the same thing?" He nodded silently, knowing she was right, but at the same time feeling irritated that she had gone behind his back. The first appointment with Dr. Gentry was scheduled for Tuesday. The psychotherapist's office was located in a small office building in the city center, nothing fancy, but not cheap either. Shelton noted this with some relief. At least this Gentry wasn't trying to impress with a luxurious office. Nathaniel Gentry was a tall man in his mid-40s with short, graying hair and attentive eyes behind stylish glasses. He shook Shelton's hand firmly, but without excessive force, the handshake of a man who was confident but not domineering. "Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Noyce," he said, pointing to comfortable chairs across from his desk. "Before we begin, I want to explain how I work. My job is not to judge or give advice, but to help you understand each other better. Think of me as a translator between two people speaking different languages." Shelton relaxed involuntarily. At least this guy wasn't spouting psychological cliches and didn't look like a typical movie shrink. The session began with general questions: how they met, how long they had been married, what they did for a living. Then Nathaniel moved on to more personal topics. What do you think has changed in your relationship over the past few years? He asked, addressing both of them. We've grown apart, Yvonne replied immediately. We used to talk a lot, share everything. Now we live like neighbors, polite but separate. Shelton grimaced at her bluntness, but couldn't deny the truth of her words. We both work a lot, he added. Evan's career is taking off, and my business is demanding more and more of my time. Is that the only reason? Nathaniel asked gently. Shelton hesitated. No, it's not the only reason, he finally said. It's like we're moving in different directions. Ivana spends more and more time with her colleagues. They have their own topics of conversation, their own jokes. And he faltered. And Shelton thinks I've become too educated for him, Ivana finished bitterly. Although I've never given him any reason to think that. Nathaniel listened attentively, occasionally jotting down notes in his notebook. His face remained neutral, but his eyes radiated sincere concern. You know what I hear? He said after a pause. Two people who care deeply about each other but speak different languages. Ivana, you crave emotional intimacy, heart-to-heart conversations. Shelton, you may be expressing your concern through your actions, providing for your family, creating stability. Shelton looked at the psychotherapist in surprise. He had never thought of it that way, but it sounded true. Our task is to find a common language, Nathaniel continued. And I suggest we start with a very simple exercise. Every day, find 10 minutes to tell each other about the most interesting thing that happened during the day. No advice, no criticism. Just listen and ask clarifying questions. It seemed too simple, almost silly, but Shelton decided not to argue. After all, he had agreed to this therapy for Ivana's sake. When they left the office, Ivana looked pensive. What do you think? Shelton asked, opening the car door. He understands, Ivana replied slowly. He's not just listening, he's really hearing what we're not saying out loud. Shelton nodded, not knowing how to respond. Something about the way his wife talked about the therapist made him feel uneasy, but he pushed the thought aside. 2 weeks later, on his way home from work, Shelton stopped by the hospital to pick up Yvonne. They had agreed to have dinner together at a new restaurant. As he walked down the hallway toward the nurse's station, he heard familiar voices coming from the half-open door of the resident's office. You seem different lately, Aja said. More lively. Is it the therapy? Partly, Yvonne replied. Dr. Gentry is really helping. He's making me see things in a different light. Only Dr. Gentry? There was a hint of something more in Aja's voice. There was a pause, and Shelton froze, listening intently. I don't know what you mean, Yvonne finally replied, but her voice sounded uncertain. Come on, Vi. AG used a nickname Shelton had never heard before. I can see how you glow after those sessions. And it's not just the therapy, is it? Shelton felt his heart beat faster. What the hell did that mean? At that moment, a nurse came out of the office and looked at him in surprise. Mr. Noyce, are you here to see Ivana? She's in her office. Shelton nodded quickly and stepped back from the door, hoping that Ivana and Aja hadn't heard their brief exchange. In Yvonne's office, he found her bent over the duty roster. She looked up and smiled at him, sincerely, warmly, as she hadn't smiled in a long time. Shelton, you're early today. He wanted to ask her about her conversation with Aja, but something stopped him. Maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe Aja was just teasing Ivana about her enthusiasm for therapy. But somewhere deep inside, a worm of doubt began to gnaw at him. Ready? He asked instead. I booked a table for 8. As they walked toward the exit, Aja came out of the doctor's office and, seeing them, froze for a moment, then smiled stiffly. Shelton? Long time no see. How are you? Everything's great, he replied, watching both women's reactions closely. Business is booming. Your wife is happy. What more could a man want? Aja nodded, but her gaze darted to Yvonne, who blushed slightly. By the way, Yvonne mentioned that you're seeing a family therapist, Aja continued. It's so great that you're working on your relationship. Yes, doctor. Gentry is very helpful, Shelton replied, keeping his eyes on his wife. I was just talking to Aja about that, Yvonne said quickly, about how he helps us understand each other better. Well, I won't keep you, Aja stepped aside. Have a nice dinner. On the way to the restaurant, Shelton was unusually quiet. Aja's words about how Ivana glowed after her sessions kept running through his mind. He remembered how his wife had changed over the past few weeks. She had indeed become more lively, smiled more often, and looked forward to each therapy session with enthusiasm. At first, he thought it was a good sign for their marriage, but now… Shelton? Are you listening to me? Yvonne's voice snapped him out of his reverie. Sorry, I was thinking about work, he lied. What were you saying? I said I'd like to increase the frequency of our sessions with Dr. Gentry, Ivana repeated. Maybe twice a week instead of once? I think we're making progress. Shelton gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm not sure I can make time twice a week, he said. I've got a lot going on at the car wash. Yvonne frowned. Shelton, we agreed that our marriage is a priority. Why don't you go by yourself? He suggested suddenly, watching her reaction closely. If the sessions are helping you so much? To his surprise, Yvonne's face lit up. You wouldn't mind? I was thinking of suggesting the same thing. Dr. Gentry said that sometimes it's helpful to have individual sessions to better understand your feelings. Shelton felt a wave of anxiety rising inside him. She had agreed too quickly, too happily, but he kept his emotions in check and simply nodded. Of course, if you think it will help. Dinner was tense, despite Ivana's attempts to keep the conversation going. Shelton couldn't stop thinking about his conversation with AJ, about his wife's sudden enthusiasm for individual sessions. Something was going on, and he intended to find out what it was. A week later, Ivana had already visited Dr. Gentry twice, once with Shelton, the second time alone. She returned from her individual session pensive and silent, and when her husband asked her how it went, she responded evasively. We talked about my expectations for marriage, about my needs, she said. It was candid. Shelton wanted to ask for more details, but Yvonne changed the subject, starting to talk about problems at work. Later that evening, while she was taking a shower, Shelton noticed her phone on the bedside table. Normally, he wouldn't check her messages. Trust was the foundation of their relationship. But something compelled him to pick up the phone and scroll through her recent contacts. There were several messages from Dr. Gentry, purely professional, about rescheduling a session, but the last message made Shelton freeze. Thinking about our conversation, you're right, sometimes you have to listen to your heart, not your head. See you tomorrow at the usual time. NG? Shelton put his phone back down, feeling anger rising inside him. What conversation was he talking about? What did listen to your heart mean? And why the hell was their therapist scheduling appointments with his wife without telling him? When Yvonne came out of the bathroom, Shelton pretended to be asleep. He didn't trust himself. He was afraid his anger would boil over and he would say or do something he would regret. He needed time to think things through, to make sure his suspicions were well-founded. The next day, when she came home from work, Ivana told him that she had made another appointment with Dr. Gentry. It's tomorrow, she said, not looking at him. There are some things I want to discuss in private. Shelton nodded slowly, deciding that tomorrow he would find out what things his wife was discussing with Dr. Gentry. And if his suspicions were confirmed, he didn't know what he would do, but he was sure he wouldn't let it go unpunished. Nathaniel Gentry never planned to violate professional ethics. In 15 years of practice, he had strictly adhered to the boundaries between himself and his patients. But with Yvonne Noyes, everything was different. Something in her eyes, a mixture of intelligence, unspoken pain, and deep emotion, struck a chord in his soul that he had long forgotten existed. At first, everything was strictly professional. He genuinely tried to help the noises improve their communication. Shelton, despite his wariness, seemed like a man who sincerely wanted to save his marriage. The problem was that the more Nathaniel learned about their relationship, the more he saw the fundamental incompatibility. When Yvonne began coming for individual sessions, she gradually opened up, talking about her dreams, her ambitions, and how lonely she felt with her husband despite 12 years of marriage. "You know," she said, sitting in the chair across from him, "when we first met, I admired his energy, his determination. He was so focused. But over time, that focus turned into an obsession with success, money, status. And what has changed in you over the years?" Nathaniel asked, watching the light from the window softly illuminate her profile. Yvonne thought for a moment. "I've become more confident in myself, in my professional abilities. I used to be just a nurse, now I'm the head of the department." She paused. "And I don't think Shelton can accept that. He wants me to remain the girl who admired him unconditionally." Nathaniel nodded. It was a common problem in couples where one partner's professional growth outpaced the other's. "Have you talked to him about it directly?" Ivana smiled bitterly. "I've tried. He either avoids the conversation or says I'm making problems out of nothing. And lately, he's hardly been home at all. All he thinks about is his new car wash." When the session ended, Nathaniel found himself not wanting to let Yvonne go. It was an alarming sign, but he convinced himself that he was just deeply empathetic toward her. "If you'd like, we can continue this conversation in a more informal setting," he offered, surprised at his own boldness. "Sometimes a change of scenery helps you see things in a new light." He expected her to refuse, but Ivana hesitated only a moment before agreeing. "That would be helpful," she said, and there was a note in her voice that hadn't been there before. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of Lisbon, far enough from the center that they wouldn't run into anyone they knew. The conversation began with a discussion of her marriage and gradually moved on to more personal topics: books, music, dreams of travel. "I've always wanted to see Paris," Yvonne confessed, stirring her coffee. "But Shelton thinks it's a waste of money. He says you have to secure your future first, then think about entertainment." "Paris isn't just entertainment," Nathaniel objected. "It's an experience that changes you. It broadens your horizons." They talked for 3 hours, and when Yvonne glanced at her watch, she gasped. "I have to go. Shelton will be worried." Nathaniel nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He didn't want the evening to end. As he walked her to her car, he gently touched her elbow. "It was nice to talk outside the office." Yvonne looked at him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, a mixture of confusion, guilt, and an inexplicable attraction. "Yes, it was different," she replied quietly. That night, when he got home, Nathaniel couldn't sleep for a long time. He knew he was crossing a line, knew he had to stop before it was too late. But he couldn't get Ivana out of his head. Meanwhile, Shelton was completely immersed in expanding his business. The 4th car wash in the Northern District required his full attention. Problems with permits, hiring staff, and equipment deliveries. He came home late, tired and irritable, barely finding the strength for a short conversation with his wife. "How was your day?" Ivana asked as he entered the bedroom, where she was already reading before bed. "Damn bureaucrats are holding up the project," he replied, collapsing onto the bed. "They're demanding some additional checks, even though all the paperwork is in order." "Maybe we should slow down the expansion for a while," Yvonne suggested cautiously. "Focus on what we have until things settle down." Shelton looked at her with irritation. "You don't understand business, Yvonne. You can't stop halfway. It's grow or die." After conversations like this, they often fell asleep back to back, not touching each other. Yvonne lay with her eyes open, thinking about how they had grown apart and about the hours she had spent with Nathaniel when she felt truly heard. Their meetings outside the office became regular. At first once a week, then more often. They met in cafes, parks, and once even visited a small art gallery. Each time, Ivana told herself that this was the last meeting, that she had to focus on her marriage. But every time Nathaniel called or sent a message, she couldn't refuse. One of those days, as they were walking along the waterfront, Nathaniel took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it changed everything. Yvonne knew she should pull away, but instead she squeezed his fingers. "We shouldn't," she whispered. "I know," he replied, looking into her eyes. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Ivania." They stood there for a few moments, holding hands and looking at each other, when Ivonia noticed a familiar figure across the street. Shaniwa Hampton, her friend and a detective with the Lisbon police, was looking straight at them, her expression one of undisguised surprise. Ivana quickly let go of Nathaniel's hand, but it was too late. Shaniwa was already heading toward them, her heels clicking decisively on the pavement. "Ivona, what a surprise," she said, looking from one to the other. "Shaniwa, hi," Ivona said, trying to sound casual. "This is Nathaniel Gentry, my therapist." "Dr. Gentry," Shaniwa said, holding out her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Nathaniel shook her hand, maintaining a professional expression. "Nice to meet you, Miss Detective Hampton," Shaniva corrected. "You have an interesting therapy method. Walks along the waterfront. Sometimes a change of scenery helps patients open up," Nathaniel replied evenly. Shaniwa nodded, but her gaze was wary. "Of course. Well, I won't keep you. Ivana, shall we talk on the phone this week?" "Yes, definitely." Ivana felt her face flush. When Shaniva left, Ivana turned to Nathaniel. "She figured it all out," she said anxiously. "And she's friends with Shelton." Nathaniel gently touched her shoulder. "We're not doing anything wrong, Ivania. We're just talking." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Something had developed between them that couldn't be explained by a professional relationship alone. The next day, Shanava called Ivania. "We need to talk," she said, without preamble. "Can you come over after work?" Ivan agreed, feeling her heart tighten with anxiety. Shaniwa was not only her friend, but also close to Shelton. They had met before Shelton had met Ivan. In Shaniwa's small apartment, they sat in the kitchen, sipping wine. "What's going on between you and Dr. Gentry?" Shaniva asked bluntly. Ivana wanted to lie, but couldn't. "I don't know," she replied honestly. We haven't been physical, but there are feelings." Shaniva looked closely at her friend. "Do you love Shelton?" Yvonne thought about it. Did she still love her husband? Or was it just habit, a sense of duty, a shared history? "I don't know," she repeated. "I used to, definitely. Now, we've grown apart." "What about Dr. Gentry?" "I don't know about that either." Ivana shook her head. "It's all so confusing, Shaniva. When I'm with him, I feel alive, understood. But maybe it's just an illusion. Maybe it's just his professional skill, making people feel special." Shaniva took a sip of wine. "I'm not going to lecture you, Vi, but you're playing with fire. Shelton isn't the kind of man who will take infidelity lightly." "I know," Yvonne replied quietly. "I'm trying to figure things out. I promise." But figuring it out wasn't so easy. The more time she spent with Nathaniel, the clearer it became that her feelings for him were real. He saw her as more than just the wife of a successful businessman, more than just a nurse. He saw her for who she really was, with all her dreams, fears, and desires. Aja also noticed the changes in her friend. One day, during their lunch break at the hospital, she brought it up. "You're glowing, Ivana. I've never seen you so happy. Is it still because of therapy?" Ivana blushed. "Partly," she replied evasively. Aja leaned closer. "Don't tell me you've fallen in love with your therapist. That's like something out of a cheap romance novel." Ivana looked up sharply, and Aja knew from her reaction that she had hit a nerve. "Oh my God, is it true?" she whispered. "Vi, do you realize how dangerous this is? If Shelton finds out—" "I can't help myself," Ivana admitted. I've tried to fight these feelings. I really have. Aja shook her head. Be careful. Very careful. But caution was no longer the word that could describe Ivana's behavior. She was seeing Nathaniel more and more often, finding any excuse to see him. Officially, they were still therapist and patient, but the reality was quite different. Meanwhile, Shelton was sinking deeper and deeper into suspicion. After that conversation in the hospital, which he overheard by accident, he became more attentive to his wife's behavior. He noticed how she hid her phone when he entered the room, how often she canceled plans together because of urgent work matters, how her mood changed after therapy sessions. One evening, when Yvonne said she would be late at work, Shelton decided to check. He called the hospital and asked for her. Mrs. Noyce? The nurse at the reception desk replied in surprise. She left 2 hours ago. She said she had personal business to attend to. Shelton felt his insides tighten with rage and pain. Personal business. What personal business could his wife have that he didn't know about? That evening, when Yvonne came home, he didn't make a scene. Instead, he watched her, noticing the slight blush on her cheeks, the sparkle in her eyes. All signs that she had had a good time, and not with him. How was your day? He asked, trying to sound casual. Normal, she replied, not looking at him. Lots of patients, lots of paperwork. Lies. She was lying to his face, and that hurt the most. The next day, Shelton didn't go to work. Instead, he parked near their house and watched. When Yvonne came out and got into her car, he followed her at a safe distance. She didn't go to the hospital. Instead, she drove to a quiet residential neighborhood on the other side of town and stopped near a small modern house. Parked at a distance, Shelton watched her approach the door, where she was greeted by a tall man. They embraced before going inside. Even from a distance, he recognized the man as Nathaniel Gentry, their family therapist. At that moment, Shelton felt something inside him break. All his suspicions had been confirmed in the most terrible way. His wife and the man they had trusted with their marriage had betrayed him. He sat in his car for 2 hours until he saw Yvonne come out of the house. They hugged again goodbye, and Shelton noticed how Gentry kissed her gently on the forehead before letting her go. Shelton returned home feeling strangely numb. The anger would come later. He knew that. Right now, he was too shocked to feel anything but a dull ache. That evening, he watched silently as Ivana prepared dinner, talked about her day at the hospital, and played the role of the caring wife. Every word she said now sounded false. Every gesture seemed like an act. He started checking her phone when she was in the shower or asleep. The messages between her and Gentry were cautious but telling. Thinking of you. Can't wait to see you. You changed my life. With each passing day, Shelton became more and more consumed by his suspicions, gathering evidence of his wife's infidelity. He started drinking, first in the evenings, then during the day. His business suffered, but he didn't care. All he could think about was Yvonne's betrayal and revenge. Meanwhile, Nathaniel became more deeply involved with Yvonne, despite all his professional and ethical reservations. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he couldn't stop. Yvonne filled a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. One evening, as they sat in his living room, Nathaniel took Ivana's hands. I can't be your therapist anymore, he said. It's unethical and unfair to you and Shelton. Ivana nodded. I know. But I don't want to lose you, he continued. What we have is real, Ivania. At least it is for me. For me too, she replied quietly. Nathaniel sighed deeply. I want you to leave him, so we can be together openly, without lies and secrets. Ivana looked at him, her eyes full of confusion and hope. Are you serious? Absolutely. He squeezed her hands tighter. I know I'm asking a lot. 12 years of marriage is no joke. But I can also see that you're unhappy with him. That your marriage has long since become an empty shell. Yvonne couldn't deny the truth of his words. Her marriage to Shelton had indeed turned into a routine, devoid of passion or understanding. But to take such a step— "I need time," she said, "to think things over, to prepare myself." Nathaniel nodded. "Of course. I understand, but know that I'll wait as long as it takes." He leaned down and kissed her, gently, carefully, as if she were the most fragile treasure in the world. Yvonne returned his kiss, feeling her heart torn between duty and desire. "I'll talk to him," she promised. "Next week, after he's finished with the new car wash." Nathaniel smiled and pulled her close. "I'll be here, no matter what happens." It was a sunny morning, but Shelton didn't notice the bright light streaming through the blinds. He sat in his office, staring at his wife's phone, which he had taken while she was in the shower. Scrolling through the messages between Yvonne and Nathaniel, he felt each word pierce his heart like a sharp blade. "I can't stop thinking about you, about our conversation yesterday, about what could have been." "Me too. Every day with you is a breath of fresh air. I feel alive for the first time in a long time. Tomorrow at the usual time, I have something important to tell you. I'll be waiting. Nathaniel." Shelton clenched his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Nathaniel. Not Dr. Gentry, as it should be between a therapist and a patient. Just Nathaniel, as between lovers. He heard the shower turn off. He had only a few minutes to put his phone back. But instead, Shelton decided to wait for his wife. It was time to end this lie. When Ivana entered the bedroom wrapped in a towel, her hair still wet, Shelton was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding her phone in his hand. "What's that?" She froze, staring at the phone. "I think you know." Shelton's voice was surprisingly calm, even though he was boiling inside. "I can't stop thinking about you. I feel alive." "Interesting therapy you're getting with Dr. Gentry." Ivana paled but didn't look away. "Have you been looking through my phone? Are you sleeping with our therapist?" They stared at each other across a chasm that grew wider with every passing second. Finally, Yvonne sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping her distance from her husband. "I'm not sleeping with him," she said quietly. "Not in a physical sense." Shelton laughed bitterly. "Oh, is that supposed to comfort me? That my wife is only cheating on me emotionally but hasn't gotten to the bedroom yet?" "You don't understand." Yvonne shook her head. "This isn't just a fling. We have a connection. He understands me in a way you never tried to." The words were like a slap in the face. Shelton jumped out of bed, trying to contain his rage. "I gave you 12 years of my life, Yvonne. I built a business to provide for us, to give us a future. And you've been looking for understanding from another man all this time?" "No, not all this time," Ivana protested. "This happened recently, and it happened because you weren't there, Shelton. You were physically at home, but mentally you were always at work, always with those car washes. When was the last time you asked me how my day was? When was the last time we really talked?" Shelton looked at her, trying to understand how they had gotten to this point. Part of him wanted to scream, to break things, to let out all the pain and rage. But another part, calculating, cold, was already forming a plan. "You're right," he said, surprising Yvonne with his calmness. "We're both to blame for the breakdown of our marriage. Maybe we need to talk to Dr. Gentry again, all together, to clear things up." Ivana looked at him warily. "You want another session?" "Yes," Shelton nodded. "One last session, to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. You're not afraid to face me and your Nathaniel at the same time." There was a note of challenge in his voice, and Yvonne felt she couldn't refuse. "All right," she said. "I'll talk to him today. I'll set up a meeting." "Great!" Shelton put her phone on the bed and headed for the door. "And Ivana," he turned back, "no more lies." The irony of his words hit him as he closed the door behind him, because the plan forming in his head was the last thing he could discuss honestly. The next day, Shelton took the day off, telling his manager he had personal business to attend to. Instead of taking his usual route to the car wash, he drove to another part of town, to a small sporting goods store that he knew also sold guns. The salesman, a thin man with a suspicious look, studied his driver's license for a long time. "First time buying?" "Yes," Shelton replied. "For self-defense. There have been a lot of robberies in our neighborhood." The salesman nodded, looking unconvinced but not asking any further questions. He showed him several models and explained the basics of safety. Shelton chose a compact pistol, small enough to hide in his pocket, but powerful enough for his purposes. "You'll need a concealed carry permit if you plan to carry it with you," the salesman warned. "Of course," Shelton nodded. "I'll take care of that." He knew he wouldn't. He didn't need a long-term permit for what he was planning. Back home, Shelton hid the gun in his office, in the safe where he kept his important documents. Then he sat down at his computer and began methodically deleting business-related files and transferring money to hidden accounts. If everything went according to plan, he would need to disappear, and he wanted to be ready. Ivana called him at noon. "Nathaniel agreed to meet," she said. "Tomorrow at 4. He cleared the last hour before closing for us." "Great," Shelton replied, trying to keep his voice normal. "I'll pick you up at the hospital." "No, I'll go straight from there," Ivana said quickly. "I have a shift until 3:30. Shelton clenched his fist but kept his voice calm. "As you wish. See you there then." After the call, he sat motionless for a long time, staring into space. Part of him still couldn't believe it was happening. That the woman he had lived with for 12 years, the woman he loved, the woman he had built a future with, had betrayed him, with the man they had trusted, with their most sacred bond, their marriage. On the other side of town, Nathaniel Gentry sat in his office, looking at his schedule for the next day. The last entry, Shelton and Ivana Noyce, 1600, evoked mixed feelings in him. He knew that what was happening between him and Ivana was wrong from a professional standpoint. He had crossed a line he had sworn never to cross. But at the same time, for the first time in many years, he felt truly alive. Yvonne had awakened feelings in him that he had long forgotten existed. His phone vibrated, a message from Yvonne. "He knows. He found our correspondence. He wants a final session to clear everything up. I'm scared, Nathaniel." Nathaniel felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this day would come, but he had hoped they would have more time, that Yvonne would be able to leave her husband peacefully, that they could start over with a clean slate. "Don't be afraid," he replied. "I'll be there for you. We'll get through this together." But even as he typed those words, he felt uncertain. He didn't know Shelton Noyce as well as he thought he did. During their sessions, Shelton had always been reserved, secretive. Nathaniel saw him as a typical workaholic, incapable of deep emotional connections. But what if he was wrong? What if there was something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface? That evening, Shanava Hampton received a strange message from Ivana. "If you can't reach me by 4 tomorrow afternoon, check Dr. Gentry's office." Shaniwa immediately called her friend back, but Ivana didn't answer. She sent another message. "What's going on, Vi? Are you okay?" The reply came 10 minutes later. "Everything's fine, just playing it safe. Shelton found out about Nathaniel and me. Let's meet tomorrow, the 3 of us." Shaniva felt uneasy. She had known Shelton for many years and had seen his outbursts of anger, although she had never noticed any tendency toward violence. But the situation was explosive. A husband who had found out about his wife's affair with their family therapist. "Do you want me to come over?" she wrote. "No, we have to figure this out ourselves. But if something goes wrong..." Shaniwa didn't wait for him to finish his message. She checked her schedule. She was on call in the afternoon tomorrow. She would be close to Dr. Gentry's office. The day of the final meeting came too quickly. Shelton woke up with a clear head and firm resolve. He no longer wavered or doubted. The plan was simple. Go to the meeting, listen to their explanations, and then he would make them pay for their betrayal. Evan spent the morning at the hospital, but she couldn't concentrate on her work. Her thoughts kept returning to the upcoming meeting. How would Shelton react when she and Nathaniel confessed their feelings? Would he accept their decision to break up? Or would it end in a scandal, possibly even physical violence? Nathaniel was nervous too. He canceled all his morning appointments to prepare for his conversation with Shelton. He understood that he bore most of the responsibility for the situation. As a professional, he should have kept his distance and not allowed his feelings to interfere with the therapeutic process. But now it was too late for regrets. He loved Yvonne and was ready to fight for their future. At 3:30, Shelton left the house and got into his car. The gun lay in his jacket's inside pocket, heavy and cold. He wasn't sure he would use it. Part of him still hoped there was another way out, that Ivana would come to her senses and return to him. But another part, dark and vengeful, longed to see the fear in Nathaniel's eyes when he realized he had gone too far. At 3:45, Yvonne left the hospital and got into her car. She wrote a short message to Shanava. "On my way to the meeting. I'll call when it's over." Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, "If I don't call by 6, check Gentry's office." At 3:50, Nathaniel dismissed his secretary, saying he would close the office himself after his meeting with the Noises. He wanted the conversation to take place without witnesses, without any possible interruptions. It was yet another mistake in a long series of professional missteps, but he felt it would be best for everyone. At 4:05, Yvonne entered Nathaniel's office. They hugged briefly, not allowing themselves more. Both knew that Shelton could appear at any moment. "How are you?" Nathaniel asked, looking into her eyes. "Nervous," Yvonne admitted. "Shelton was too calm yesterday. That's not like him." Nathaniel wanted to say something reassuring, but at that moment the door opened and Shelton entered. He looked composed, almost businesslike, in his suit with his hair neatly combed. Only his eyes betrayed his inner state, cold with a dangerous gleam. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, looking around the office. "Nice place for therapy." Nathaniel stepped forward, extending his hand. "Shelton, I'm glad you came. I think we all need to have an honest talk." Shelton ignored his hand and walked over to the chair where he usually sat during sessions. "Are we going to talk about honesty?" he sneered. "Interesting choice of topic for a man who sleeps with his patient's wife." "Shelton," Ivana leaned forward. "We're not—" "Don't lie to me anymore," Shelton cut her off sharply. "I saw you together, at his house. I followed you, Ivana. I saw him kiss you." Nathaniel tensed. The situation was becoming more dangerous than he had anticipated. "Shelton," he tried to speak calmly, "I understand your anger. You have every right to be angry. What happened between me and Yvonne violates all professional and ethical standards, and I am prepared to take responsibility for that." "Responsibility?" Shelton laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "What responsibility? Will you lose your license? Pay a fine? And what will that change? Will it give me back the 12 years of my life that I gave to this woman?" He turned to Yvonne. "I built a business for us, Yvonne. Every day I worked to secure our future, and you sought understanding from another man." "You built a business for yourself, Shelton," Yvonne replied quietly. "Not for us. You never asked me what I wanted, what we wanted together." Shelton looked at her, and there was so much pain in his eyes that Nathaniel felt uncomfortable. "I loved you," Shelton said. "Everything I did for you." "I know," Yvonne nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "But loving someone doesn't mean owning them, Shelton. It doesn't mean making decisions for them." Nathaniel watched their exchange, feeling both responsible for and a witness to the breakdown of this marriage. He knew he had to intervene, steer the conversation in a constructive direction. "Shelton, Ivana," he said, "perhaps we should discuss how you see your future, separately or together." Shelton turned to him, and there was something frightening in his gaze. "And what are you here for? As a therapist or as my wife's lover?" Nathaniel held his gaze. I'm here as a man who made a mistake, who crossed professional boundaries, but I'm not going to deny my feelings for Yvonne. Feelings. Shelton said the word with such contempt that it sounded like a curse. And what do you suggest? That you and Yvonne ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after? I suggest we all face reality, Nathaniel replied. Your marriage has long since ceased to make either of you happy. Yvonne is miserable. You are too, Shelton, though you may not admit it even to yourself. Shelton slowly rose from his chair and walked over to the window. Sunlight flooded the room, creating a strange contrast to the gloomy atmosphere of the conversation. You know what hurts the most? He said without turning around. That you both think I'm an idiot. Do you think I haven't seen the way you look at each other? The way Yvonne's voice changes when she talks about you? I've seen it all, from the very beginning. He turned around, and Nathaniel saw with horror the gun in his hand. Shelton, Ivana whispered, what are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, Shelton replied, pointing the gun at Nathaniel. Protecting what's mine. Nathaniel slowly raised his hands. Shelton, let's talk. Put the gun down. This won't solve anything. You're right, Shelton nodded. It won't bring back the 12 years I lost. It won't bring back the wife I loved. But it will give me some satisfaction. Ivana jumped up from her chair. Shelton, please don't do this. This is crazy. Crazy? He pointed the gun at her. Crazy is betraying the person who loved you more than anything in the world. Crazy is destroying a family for a fleeting infatuation. It's not a whim, Ivana said firmly, staring straight into the barrel of the gun. I love him, Shelton, and if you really loved me, you would want me to be happy. Shelton looked at her, and doubt flashed in his eyes. For a moment, Nathaniel thought he would lower the gun. That reason would prevail over rage. But then Shelton's face froze in a mask of determination. Goodbye, Ivana, he said, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out deafeningly in the confined space of the office. Yvonne recoiled, a red stain spreading across her blouse. She looked at Shelton in disbelief, then slowly sank to the floor. Nathaniel rushed toward her, but Shelton pointed the gun at him. Don't move, he ordered, or the next bullet is yours. She's dying, Nathaniel shouted. Let me help her. Shelton stared at his wife lying on the floor, her blood spreading across the light-colored carpet. Something in his expression changed. The rage gave way to horror at the realization of what he had done. Nathaniel seized the moment and rushed toward the telephone on the desk. Shelton snapped out of his stupor and fired again. The bullet hit Nathaniel in the chest, throwing him against the wall. Shelton stood in the middle of the office, the gun still in his hand. Sunlight streamed through the window, mercilessly illuminating the horrific scene. Two people bleeding on the floor of the office where they were supposed to find help and understanding. Shaniwa Hampton pulled up to Dr. Gentry's office at 10 minutes past 6. Ivana wasn't answering her calls, and that worried her. Her detective instincts told her that something was wrong. As she parked, she noticed Shelton's familiar SUV. This only heightened her anxiety. She quickly checked her service weapon and headed for the building. The door to the reception area was unlocked. The silence in the room seemed ominous. Shaniva slowly walked through the reception area to the office door. She cautiously turned the handle and froze in the doorway, stunned by the scene that greeted her. Evan was lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. A few steps away from her was the body of Nathaniel Gentry, and in the chair by the window sat Shelton, a gun on his lap, his eyes vacant. Shelton, Shaniwa called softly, keeping her hand on her holster. What have you done? He turned his head as if only now noticing her presence. Shaniwa. His voice sounded strangely detached. They betrayed me. Both of them. Shaniwa quickly assessed the situation. She needed to check if Ivana and Nathaniel were still alive, but first, she had to neutralize Shelton. Give me the gun, Shelton, she said, slowly approaching him. Please, let's not make this worse. To her surprise, Shelton obediently handed her the weapon. She quickly took it and rushed to check Ivana's pulse. "She's alive," Shaniva breathed, feeling a faint pulse. Then she checked Nathaniel. "He is too. Hang in there, Vi. Help is on the way." She called an ambulance and backup, then returned to Shelton, who was still sitting motionless in his chair. "Why Shelton?" she asked, looking at the man she had known for many years. "Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped." "They loved each other," he replied quietly. "And I loved her. What was left for me?" "To go on living," Shaniwa said simply, "like everyone else whose heart is broken." 2 weeks later, in the district court in Lisbon, Mississippi, the preliminary hearing began in the case of Shelton Noyce, accused of the attempted murder of 2 people. The courtroom was packed. The case had caused a stir in the small town where everyone knew each other. Shaniwa sat in the front row. As the prosecution's key witness, she was supposed to testify, but that wasn't the only reason she was there. She wanted to understand how a man she had considered a friend had become a murderer. Before the hearing began, Aja Nowell approached her. "How are they?" Shaniva asked. "Nathaniel regained consciousness yesterday," Aja replied. "The doctors say the prognosis is favorable. Ivana," she faltered. "The bullet grazed her lung. She's still in critical condition but stable." Shaniwa nodded. It was difficult for her to feel sympathy for Nathaniel Gentry, whose unprofessional behavior had been the catalyst for the tragedy, but she was glad that both he and Ivana had survived. When Shelton was wheeled into the room, she barely recognized him. In just 2 weeks, he had lost a lot of weight, his features were sharp, and his eyes were empty. He nodded to her as he passed by, but his gaze was fixed somewhere far away, as if he were already in another world. The hearing was brief. Shelton pleaded guilty to all charges, refusing to make a deal with the prosecution. His lawyer stated his intention to build a defense based on temporary insanity, but it was clear that Shelton was not particularly interested in getting a lighter sentence. After the hearing, Shaniva was allowed a brief conversation with the defendant. They sat in the visiting room, separated by a table. "You shouldn't have pleaded guilty so quickly," she said. "Your lawyer could have gotten a lighter sentence." Shelton shrugged. "What difference does it make? I did what I did, and I'd do it again." Shaniva looked at him intently. "Do you really mean that? Even now when your emotions have calmed down?" He looked down at his hands. "I don't know. Sometimes I think I'll wake up and it will all be a bad dream. That Ivana will be there, that we'll be together again, like before." He looked up at Shaniva, and then I remember her face when I pulled the trigger, and I realize that nothing will ever be the same again. "Is there anything you'd like to say to her?" Shaniva asked. "If you had the chance?" Shelton was silent for a long time, thinking about the question. "I'd like to say I'm sorry. Not for shooting him, that man destroyed my family, but for not being the husband she deserved, for not seeing how unhappy she was until it was too late." Shaniwa nodded. She understood him, though she couldn't excuse him. "I'll tell her when she comes to," she promised. A month later, Shaniva stood at the entrance to the hospital ward. The doctors had finally allowed short visits to Yvonne, whose condition had improved enough that she had been moved from intensive care to a regular ward. Yvonne lay on the bed, pale and emaciated, but alive. Seeing her friend, she smiled weakly. "Shaniwa." Her voice was barely audible. "Thank you for coming." Shaniwa approached the bed and gently took Yvonne's hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like my husband shot me," Ivana tried to joke, but the smile quickly faded from her face. "How is he?" "In jail," Shaniva replied briefly. "He's awaiting trial, although he has already admitted his guilt. He'll probably get 10 to 15 years, considering the aggravating circumstances." Ivana closed her eyes, digesting the information. "And Nathaniel?" "He was discharged a week ago. As far as I know, he left town. His license has been suspended pending investigation." Ivana nodded. Then, without opening her eyes, she asked, "Do you think I'm to blame?" Shaniwa thought about this question for a long time. She was a friend to both Shelton and Yvonne. She had seen their marriage slowly fall apart, how they had grown apart. And although she didn't approve of Yvonne's actions, she couldn't help but understand her motives. "I think you all made mistakes," she finally replied. "Shelton ignored your emotional needs. You sought comfort from another man instead of talking to your husband about your problems. Nathaniel crossed professional boundaries he swore he would never cross. But none of you deserved this ending." Eve opened her eyes, and Shaniva saw tears in them. "I loved Shelton," she whispered. "I really did once. But then we became strangers living under the same roof, and I didn't know how to fix it." Shaniva squeezed her hand. "I know, Vi, I know." They sat in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. Through the open window came the sounds of the city, car horns, people talking, birds singing. Life went on, despite the tragedies and broken hearts. "He asked me to tell you he was sorry," Shaniva finally said. "Not that he shot Nathaniel, but that he couldn't be a better husband." Ivana was silent for a long time, then nodded. "I'm sorry, too, for a lot of things." As she left the hospital, Shaniva thought about how easily human connections can be destroyed and how difficult it is to repair them, about how love can turn into hate and passion into tragedy, and about how even in the darkest stories there is room for regret and perhaps forgiveness. But some wounds are too deep to ever heal completely, and some shots forever change the trajectory not only of bullets, but of human destinies.